Hey everyone, what is going on? I'm Matthew Oliver, and this is Stillwater Alchemy, the podcast, episode 8, The Gemini Full Moon. On today's episode, we're going to be looking at this Gemini full moon, what it means, the major themes, aspects, and how you can integrate all of this to use to your advantage. So let's dive in, shall we? Some of you listening may have noticed there was a brief respite between episode 7 and today's episode. That is because I was launching and creating Stillwater Alchemy's online community, the Alchemy Point, during the months of October and November. I launched that beautiful online community shortly after the Scorpio new moon. If you know, you know. And everything has been going swimmingly well. I really wanted to just take time to enjoy that launch, to enjoy that expansion of the business. And that was a very wise decision. However, during this Mercury retrograde specifically, I was able to think back on how I wanted to move forward with Stillwater Alchemy, the podcast, especially moving into 2025. And one of the best ways to learn astrology is retrospectively, that you're able to look back at certain transits or certain lunations and really see, right, maybe I couldn't see it during that certain new moon or full moon, but a year later or 2 years later, the lessons or the themes or the events of that certain transit are very, very obvious, especially as you expand your understanding and knowledge of astrology. And what's interesting is that I launched Stillwater Alchemy, the podcast, on the Gemini new moon. And now, fast forward, which is kind of crazy, given that's already been 6 months, we are here at the Gemini full moon, which only makes perfect sense that I'm coming back in full force with many new content ideas, many new episode ideas moving forward into the new year for this podcast. So, with that being said, this is a really good part for you to reflect on the past 6 months for yourself, specifically how you are expressing yourself, how you communicate your needs, your wants, your desires. Because remember, that Gemini new moon happened on June 6th, and this Gemini full moon is happening on December 15th. And for those who are watching the video version on Stillwater Alchemy's YouTube, I'm bringing up the natal chart for the Gemini full moon. And we can see here as well that with this Gemini full moon, that the moon is going to be at 23 degrees of Gemini. Jupiter is at 15 degrees retrograde in the sign of Gemini. This is really important because if we're looking at lunations and understanding their cycle, during the new moon in Gemini, the moon was also co-present to Jupiter. And now we also have the full moon in aspect to Jupiter. So for many of us, especially if we're looking at the Gemini ruled part of our natal chart, there's going to be something very obvious that has culminated in the past 6 months. Why? Because of Jupiter's influence. Jupiter is going to bring some level of understanding, expansion, healing, wisdom, guidance, mentorship, luck, even. So, even just understanding in how you voice your needs, wants, desires, how you are communicating in a different way, how you're communicating a more expansive way. Remember, Gemini is a mutable air sign ruled by Mercury. What's also extremely interesting about this specific full moon is that its ruling planet is Mercury, but it's Mercury retrograde in the sign of Sagittarius. And this full moon is going to be going exact at 4:01 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on December 15th. And about 12 hours later, around 3 p.m., is when Mercury's going to station direct. And I've talked about this in past content in the sense that when a planet is stationing, especially a personal planet like Mercury, Mars, and Venus, that the themes of that station, the themes of that planet's retrograde become very, very loud, at least in my personal experience, in the sense that whatever you are working on with that planet's retrograde, the day before, the day of, and the day after the station, whether it's stationing retrograde or stationing direct, get to be very clear, get to be very obvious translations of what you are going to learn if the planet is stationing retrograde, or what you have learned, or what you're now being asked to expand upon when the planet is stationing direct. And I always say this, that astrology is very poetic, but the fact that we're having a Gemini full moon on the day that Mercury is stationing just seems like, in my opinion, a very, very obvious clue that communication and how we speak on certain things is going to be a pivotal point in how we are moving forward, but especially moving into 2025. If we are looking at the transits, Mercury is at 6 degrees of Sagittarius, retrograde, but will soon be stationing direct. Mars is currently retrograde in the sign of Leo at 5 degrees. So Mercury doesn't get to the exact trine-based aspect to Mars because it's going to station direct at 6 degrees, and Mars is already moving backwards. But there's likely to be some type of energy, given that Mars and Mercury in such strong aspect, that is coming up for you in and around this Gemini full moon. Given that it's a trine based aspect, there might be things that are more clear, that you have more direction, more purpose, more of a prominence or determination in a certain mercurial manner. This could be with regards to business and commerce. This could be in how you communicate. This could be in how you correspond with one another. Perhaps you're getting a far more organized in how you are addressing emails, or how you study, or how you learn. And if we want to go into this even a little bit more, for those of you who are more intermediate in your astrological knowledge, you can look to the houses ruled by Sagittarius and Leo to see where that Mercury Mars influence is happening, and then ground that back into your Gemini ruled house. We're looking at the Gemini ruled house because that's where this full moon is occurring. So, of course, if you are someone that has dominant Gemini energy in your natal chart, especially your sun, rising, or moon, you are going to be feeling this Gemini full moon very, very powerfully. And for those of you with that prominent Gemini energy, looking back to the beginning of June, especially in and around June 6th, that would have been when we had the Gemini new moon. And now 6 months later, it is the full moon. It's like the harvesting of these lunar domains. And of course, if we're talking about the moon, there are going to be themes of our emotions, our body, the home, mothering. It could even be certain cities and countries that you live in that are up for review as well. But if we're talking about the moon in an air sign, and this is all air signs, so Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius, there is a very, very strong need to express yourself, to talk in order to understand your emotions, or even being able to label your emotions properly so that your body can digest these things. If all of you listening are familiar with Brene Brown's research, Brene Brown is a Scorpio goddess. I would highly recommend reading her books or listening to her content. But she talked about in a HBO docu-series, essentially, it's called Atlas of the Heart, for those who are curious. She said that how we label emotions directly correlates to how the body experiences them. So let's just say you're very modest and you're like, I'm happy, I'm okay, I'm doing all right, versus like, no, I'm ecstatic. Like, this is literally the best day ever. I'm so happy, I'm so enthralled. I want everyone to know it. Those are two different energies that are going to manifest in your body when you're literally vibrating with how ecstatic you are versus just being content. We all have had different experiences where it's content happy versus ecstatic happy. And the same thing, she gives the example of stressed versus overwhelmed. We can all deal with stress relatively easily, and some stress is really, really good, like stress at the gym when you're finishing that last set, or stress to reach a timeline or a deadline where you know you can get it done, but it's kind of exciting to see how quick you can get the things done and submitted so that if you finish early, then you can go on holiday sooner. But if you are overwhelmed, that is when your body is shutting down, when you can't even do the most basic of tasks like getting yourself a glass of water or being able to eat anything or be able to answer your phone. And so when you say I'm overwhelmed to someone, if they have strong emotional intelligence, they're going to say, okay, what do you need? What can I do for you right now? For you to get back to a place of operating at some functioning level. And I'm bringing this up because, again, how we speak to ourselves will play a part in our energy levels and how we can move, how we can act, right? We're going back to that Mercury Mars trine that I was speaking about. And Mars can also relate to battle, conflict, aggression, anger, frustration, and how we deal with that. And I'm currently in Calgary, Canada, but I'm currently based in Toronto. And Canada Post has been under strike ever since Mercury was in the pre-retrograde shadow. So it's been interesting in my mind. I was thinking, when is this strike going to end? Because we're very close to Christmas. We're in the middle of the holiday season. Canadians not being able to get certain mail has been detrimental, of course. And I was thinking this Gemini full moon in aspect to Jupiter, even though Jupiter is retrograde, it still brings some kind of levity, hope, finances, distributing of money, distributing of ideas. And then we also have Mercury, the ruling planet of this lunation, being in very close aspect to Mars. And the notion of a retrograde going back, especially with Mercury, being very correlated to the mailing system, distributing information, distributing correspondence, and how they can reach a resolve, and how we're going back down to negotiate. Negotiations is very Mercury Mars as well, right? You're strategizing and going back and forth between a boss and employee or a union and the staff on how to come up to an amicable, fair agreement on how money is going to be placed for them to do their job. So that is also just from a macro perspective that I was thinking, okay, in and around this full moon, there's likely to be some kind of clarity, some kind of negotiation, some kind of path forward for these very mercurial staff for Canada Post to do their job and also bring joy to everyone to get their packages for the holiday season. And so that's another way that we're looking at lunations, especially retrospectively. If we come back to this episode in a month from now, 6 months from now, a year from now, it's like, right, that Gemini full moon activated in certain ways on a macro scale, but how did it affect me on an individual scale? How did I treat my voice? How did I express myself clearly? What did I expand upon from June of 2024? And how did I end the year in that Gemini ruled part of my natal chart? So these are all things for you to ponder and to understand with this Gemini full moon. And if you're wanting additional resources, all members of the Alchemy Point receive custom meditations for each lunation, each new moon, and each full moon. So I'll put the link in the show notes or in the description of this video if you're watching on Stillwater Alchemy's YouTube page for access to the Alchemy Point, Stillwater Alchemy's online community. And I also have a Mars retrograde workshop now available. If you're curious on how to use this Mars retrograde energy, especially in your specific natal chart, that workshop goes step by step on how to understand what a Mars retrograde cycle looks like, how to review the last Mars retrograde that we had to understand that from a retrospective manner, and then seeing how it's going to manifest in your natal chart, the prominent aspects with this Mars retrograde, and then how you can use that to your advantage. And there's also a very cute, powerful guided meditation at the end of that workshop as well to give you all the resources to move forward into the new year with a lot more vitality and confidence. So that's all from me today. If you enjoyed the information that entered your ears during this episode, of course, I would greatly appreciate it if you gave a positive 5-star review on whichever podcast app you are listening to. Feel free to leave comments on what resonated, what you are excited about with this full moon energy, and what else you'd like to hear through Stillwater Alchemy, the podcast, moving into 2025. Thank you all for listening. Thank you all for watching, and I'll talk to you soon. Mwah. Bye. What's also wild is if you notice these double fox, one fox being a mirror image, and this is a Gemini full moon. I just happened to be in a hotel and had the setup to have that. It's just like the universe is always watching and always protecting us. If you feel called, feel free to look up the spiritual significance of the fox.